She said, "I'm old enough to know better, but not tonight." And just like that, every rule we'd both lived by began to quietly unravel. The night had that kind of quiet weight that sits in your chest before you even know why. A soft drizzle had started just before I arrived, leaving the streets slick and shining under streetlights. It wasn't a loud night. It wasn't the kind that begs for attention. It just settled around everything, slow and calm. I didn't expect anything remarkable to happen at that dinner. I almost didn't go. But there she was, sitting at the end of the long wooden table, her wine glass catching the amber light. I noticed her before I realized I was watching. She wasn't the loudest in the room. She wasn't trying to be. But something about the way she existed made the air around her feel quieter. Like the noise softened out of respect for her. Her hair fell loosely over her shoulders, and every now and then, she tucked a strand behind her ear in a way that seemed almost absent-minded. There was a steadiness in her, the kind you can't fake. She must have felt me looking because, at one point, her gaze lifted slow, deliberate, and met mine across the room. No smile. Not yet. Just an acknowledgement. A flicker of connection that was too brief to name but too strong to ignore. She laughed at something someone said, and I swear the sound of it reached me before the words did. Not loud. Not forced. Just real. The kind of laugh that wraps itself around a moment and makes it linger. We didn't talk right away. It happened the way quiet things do, naturally. A mutual friend made a joke, a round of glasses refilled, and somehow, I ended up standing beside her near the kitchen counter. Up close, her presence was even more grounding. She didn't rush her words. She didn't fill silences with nervous chatter. She let the quiet breathe. "Cold night," I said. Not smooth, not clever, just honest. She tilted her head, lips curving into a small, amused smile. It's the kind of night that makes everything slow down, isn't it?" Her voice was warm, low, a little husky, like someone who's lived enough life to not waste words. She asked what I did for a living, but it didn't feel like small talk. Felt like she actually listened, and I found myself doing the same. Watching the way her eyes softened when she spoke, the faint lines at the corners that told stories without needing words. Someone brushed past her to reach for a bottle, and in that small shift, her hand brushed my arm. Just a passing touch. But it stayed. The warmth of it stayed. That was the moment, I think, when everything changed. She lifted her glass, took a slow sip, and looked at me over the rim, calm, steady, unreadable. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something awaken quietly inside me. Something I hadn't expected. Something that didn't need to be named. The night outside kept drizzling. But between us, something was beginning to burn slow and quiet. The dinner was winding down the way good nights do. Not with a sharp ending, but with a soft, steady unraveling. Laughter had thinned into quiet conversations. Coats were being collected. Glasses were half empty. The kind of careless fullness that only happens when no one's quite ready to leave. And somehow, in the middle of all that soft noise, it was just her and me at the edge of the kitchen counter. She leaned against it like she belonged there, not as a guest, but as someone who'd always known this kind of night. She held her glass loosely, the stem turning slowly between her fingers. There was a quiet elegance in how she moved, like every gesture carried its own story. I wasn't the only one talking to her that night, but it felt like every time she turned her head, every time her eyes found mine, the rest of the room blurred at the edges. She asked me about music. It wasn't the usual, "What kind of songs do you like?" question people throw around to fill time. No, she asked like someone who wanted to know what moves you. So I told her about how some songs hit like memories, even if you've never lived them. And then she said something that stuck to my ribs. "The best songs don't just make you feel, they make you remember." I swear, the way she said it, soft, steady, like she'd lived through 1,000 late nights like this. It made the moment stretch a little longer than it should have. She laughed at one of my replies, tilting her head back just enough for the warm kitchen light to brush her neck and collarbone. It wasn't loud or practiced. It was honest, the kind of laugh that stays with you. At one point, someone passed behind me, and she shifted closer, her hand brushing against my forearm as she steadied herself. It wasn't intentional. Or maybe it was. But it was enough. Enough to leave a small warmth on my skin. Like the night had just folded a secret into it. There was something almost dangerous about how easy it was to talk to her. Not because of what was being said, but because of what wasn't. Every silence between us wasn't empty. It breathed. It carried something neither of us wanted to name too soon. She told me about the cities she'd lived in. About a small apartment in Lisbon with a window that faced the sea. About a bookstore she used to walk to on rainy mornings. I listened like her words were a map, and I was slowly tracing the edges of a world I hadn't known existed. The night around us was still. Just the low hum of conversation from the other room, the clinking of glasses being stacked in the sink, and her voice, wrapping itself around my focus like a ribbon. I wasn't imagining it anymore. The pull was real. She didn't need to flirt. She didn't need to try. She just was. And in that quiet, easy way, she was becoming the most magnetic part of the night. The night didn't end when it was supposed to. One by one, people started to leave, with light hugs, soft goodbyes, and the promise of, "We'll do this again soon." The air outside had turned cooler. You could feel the rain in the way people tightened their jackets and walked a little faster down the steps. But we stayed. We didn't plan to. Neither of us said it out loud. It just happened. The house grew quieter with each door that clicked shut. Laughter faded into the night, the sound of rain filling the spaces they left behind. The warm kitchen light was still on, golden and soft, like it was meant just for us. She was barefoot now, shoes dangling from one hand, her other hand resting lightly on the counter as she leaned back. There was something disarming about seeing her like that. Elegant, but stripped of all the little defenses people wear when they're surrounded by others. She looked real. I sat on the bar stool opposite her, elbows on my knees, just watching her talk. She was telling me a story about a road trip she once took in her 30s. She described it in a way that made me see it. The broken highway, the way the sun dipped low in the rearview mirror, the freedom of not needing to explain where you were going to anyone. Her voice carried the kind of weight that only comes from lived moments. Not fantasy, not performance, life. And somewhere between her words, something quiet was building. A thread neither of us pulled, but both of us felt. She tilted her head at me when I went silent. "What?" she asked, a half-smile tugging at her lips. "Nothing," I said. "I'm just listening." That made her laugh softly. Not the bright laugh from earlier in the night. A softer one. Closer. There were no more footsteps in the hallway now. Just the two of us. The rain against the windows. The dim hum of the refrigerator. And the way her eyes found mine in the stillness. She shifted closer to the counter, resting both hands on its edge. Her hair fell forward a little, catching the light. I wanted to say something clever, something smooth, but nothing felt right, so I didn't. I just let the quiet happen. She sighed, her voice lower now. "I don't usually stay this late." I nodded. "Then why are you still here?" Her eyes lingered on mine. I could ask you the same thing. The kind of silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick, warm, charged. The air between us felt suspended, like time itself had forgotten to move. Outside, the rain grew steadier, tracing thin silver lines down the window. She brushed a strand of hair behind her ear and whispered, almost to herself, "You make me forget the hour." And that's when I realized the night wasn't holding us here. We were holding it. The rain had settled into a steady rhythm by the time we stepped outside. The air was cool, carrying that clean, soft scent that only comes after hours of drizzle. The porch light hummed faintly above us, casting a warm pool of light that made everything else fade into the background. She stood a few feet from me, umbrella still closed in her hand, almost like she couldn't quite decide whether to leave or stay. Her hair was a little messy now, strands sticking softly against her cheek from the damp air. She didn't seem to care. I offered to walk her to her car, but she didn't move. She just looked out into the quiet street, her shoes dangling from her fingers. "Give me a second," she said softly. Her voice didn't carry the same practiced ease it did earlier. It was lower now. Honest. I leaned against the railing, hands in my pockets, watching the way the rain blurred everything beyond the porch. Neither of us rushed to fill the silence. It wasn't awkward anymore. It was deliberate. Then she said my name. Not loud, not careful. Just like that. Like it had always belonged on her tongue. There was something about the way she said it that cracked something open in me. It wasn't flirtatious. It wasn't a test. It was quiet, intimate, real. She finally turned to face me, a faint smile playing at the corner of her lips. But her eyes, they carried something else. Something heavier. I'm not usually the one who lingers, she said. I know better. There was a wryness to her voice, but underneath it, a flicker of something unguarded. I'm old enough to know exactly how this kind of night should end. I should have left an hour ago. I should have said goodnight inside, like everyone else. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to interrupt her. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing, almost like letting the night hold her was easier than holding it all herself. But for some reason, I don't want to. The words hung between us, as fragile and steady as the rain. I took a small step closer. Not enough to close the distance, but enough for her to feel that I'd heard her, that I wasn't running from it. Her fingers tightened slightly around the umbrella handle. I could tell she was fighting something, logic, reason, a lifetime of knowing how stories like this are supposed to go. And then, she looked at me, not like she was searching for permission, but like she was allowing herself to feel something she'd long kept under lock and key. It wasn't a grand declaration. It wasn't a confession. It was just a woman standing on a quiet porch in the rain, letting a single night carry her somewhere she didn't plan to go. And maybe that's what made it so powerful. Because in that moment, under the humming porch light and the soft pull of everything unsaid, something between us finally stopped pretending it wasn't real. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The rain had softened into a mist, not heavy enough to make us move, just enough to blur the edges of everything around us. The street was quiet now. No cars, no footsteps, just the soft rhythm of water dripping from the porch roof and the faint hum of distant traffic. She still hadn't opened her umbrella. Her shoes dangled from her fingertips, forgotten. I stood a few steps away, but it didn't feel like distance. It felt like the air between us was alive, full of things we weren't saying, full of the weight of a night neither of us planned for. She shifted her weight slightly, her bare feet pressing against the cold wood of the porch. A single strand of wet hair clung to her cheek. I wanted to reach out and tuck it behind her ear, but I didn't. Not yet. When she finally spoke, her voice came out low, almost like it was meant for no one else to hear. Not tonight. She wasn't talking to me, not exactly. It sounded like something she said to herself, a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. I took one slow step closer. She didn't move away. Up close, I could see the way the porch light caught in the raindrops on her skin. I could hear the way her breath came just a little slower than before. There's a moment right before the world tilts, when everything goes impossibly quiet. This was that moment. Her hand brushed against mine. Barely. Just a whisper of touch. But it was enough to unravel everything calm inside me. I didn't grab her hand. I didn't pull her in. I just let it be, the gentle collision of two people standing on opposite sides of reason. You make it too easy to forget, she whispered. Her eyes lifted to mine, and for the first time, she didn't hide behind her smile. There was something raw there. A mix of fear, hunger, hesitation, and something that felt dangerously close to hope. I reached up slowly, giving her every chance to step back. She didn't. My fingers brushed the wet strand of hair from her cheek, tucking it gently behind her ear. Her breath hitched, just barely, and I felt it, more than I heard it. She laughed softly then. Not the practiced kind. Not the polite kind. But the kind that slips out when someone is caught between fighting what they feel and giving in to it. The porch light flickered faintly. The rain wrapped the world in a hush. And for a heartbeat, it felt like nothing existed beyond the few inches between us. She looked at me like someone standing at the edge of something she both feared and craved. And I realized so was I. Neither of us crossed that last inch. We didn't need to, because sometimes the loudest confessions are made in silence, in a breath shared, in a touch that lingers too long, in the way two people stand still when the world around them moves on. We ended up in her car without ever deciding to. The rain had picked up again, soft but steady, beating on the windshield and turning the world outside into a blur of silver streaks. The engine was off. The only light came from the street lamp a few feet away, just enough to draw soft lines across her face. It felt like the world had been reduced to this small, quiet space. Just the two of us. She sat in the driver's seat, both hands wrapped loosely around the steering wheel, staring straight ahead as if the rain itself was giving her something to hold on to. I sat in the passenger seat, not daring to move too much. The air in the car was warm, but charged, like every breath carried something heavier than either of us wanted to name. She finally broke the silence with a sigh. "This is crazy," she said softly. Not sharp, not dismissive, just the truth laid out in the dark. I didn't answer right away, because she wasn't looking for reassurance. She was saying it to make sense of something that didn't fit neatly into rules. She turned her head then, and for the first time, really looked at me. Not with the careful, playful distance she'd held earlier in the night, but with something closer, more fragile, more dangerous. Her voice lowered. "You make me feel stupid." She caught herself, shook her head, and corrected softly, "No, not stupid, just alive." And that's the problem, isn't it? I wanted to reach for her hand, but I didn't rush it. She was still trying to figure out whether this was a moment she could trust. "You're not a problem," I said quietly. She laughed once, breathless, unsure. "I'm old enough to know how this usually ends." Her words didn't sting. They settled, because they were real. "Maybe it doesn't have to end that way," I whispered. She stared at me for a long second, and the rain kept drawing thin lines down the glass, like the night itself was listening. Then her fingers slid from the steering wheel, slow and careful, and found mine. Not like a decision, like a quiet surrender. Her hand was warm, soft, trembling just enough to let me know this wasn't easy for her. I didn't grip it. I just held it, steady, gentle, like something too fragile to break. She closed her eyes, and for a moment, she just breathed. Her forehead leaned forward, finding mine halfway. No kiss, no rush, just a quiet collision of two people finally letting down their guards. Up close, I could feel the warmth of her breath, the faint trace of her perfume, the tiny tremor in her fingers. "This doesn't make sense," she whispered against the quiet. "Maybe it doesn't have to," I murmured back. The rain on the windshield blurred everything else away. There was no world beyond this car. No expectations. No age. Just a heartbeat suspended in borrowed time. And in that silence, forehead to forehead, fingers tangled, breaths mingling, the night stopped feeling like something temporary, started feeling like something real. By the time the rain began to fade, a soft pale light was already creeping into the edges of the sky. It wasn't a loud sunrise, just a quiet blue glow that made the world outside the car look fragile, like everything had slowed down to a whisper. She'd leaned back in the driver's seat, her head tilted slightly toward me, her eyes half closed. Not from sleep, from stillness, from the rare kind of calm that finds you when you stop running from what's real. We hadn't kissed. We hadn't crossed that invisible line. But we didn't need to. Something between us had already shifted. Quietly, deeply, without asking for permission. She turned her head toward me, her hair falling gently across her cheek. For a moment, she just looked. No pretense. No walls. Just a woman and a man sitting in the gray-blue light of a morning they didn't expect to share. Her voice came out soft, almost like it was still wrapped in the night. "This doesn't have to be forever," she said. I didn't flinch. I didn't reach for guarantees. I just listened. She exhaled slowly, like she'd been holding her breath for years. "But I'm not pretending it isn't real." That was her way of giving this night a heartbeat, without naming it, without chaining it to a future. I nodded because sometimes the truest things don't need a speech. Sometimes, a quiet "I hear you" is enough. She gave me a small smile then. Tired, honest, beautiful. The kind of smile that says I didn't plan for this, but I'm glad it happened. When she finally reached for my hand again, it wasn't hesitant like before. It was slow and deliberate, like a truth settling into place. Our fingers fit together easily, too easily, as if we'd done it 1,000 times before. We sat like that for a while, saying nothing, letting the world outside turn from rain-soaked night to quiet morning. And then, like all moments you wish could last forever, it came time to let it go. She started the car, the low rumble breaking the silence but not the warmth. She drove me back down the empty street, her hand still resting in mine, thumb tracing slow, absent circles against my skin. When she pulled over in front of my place, neither of us reached for the door handle right away. She just stared straight ahead for a second, then turned to me, that same unreadable softness in her eyes. "Take care of yourself," she whispered. I nodded. "You too." She didn't kiss me. She didn't need to. Her gaze lingered a second longer than it should have, the kind of look that carves itself into your memory before you realize it's happening. I stepped out into the cool dawn, her scent still clinging to my jacket. The rain had stopped. The street was quiet. As her car pulled away, I didn't feel an ending. Not really. What I felt was something quieter. A truth that didn't need to be dressed up. I'll remember the way she looked at me that morning. Not like a fantasy, not like a goodbye, but like someone who had chosen, just for one night, to let the world stand still. If the story touched something quiet inside you, don't let it just fade away. Hit that like button to let me know you felt it too. Subscribe if you want more stories where emotions breathe slowly, where looks say more than words, and moments linger long after they end. And if you've ever had a night you'll never forget, share it in the comments below. Someone out there might need to hear it.